coming out of the gate strong, bird nerds, in 2023. Here's the audio from a live stream done just yesterday with Australia's very first Threatened Species Commissioner and now passionate land rehabilitator, Gregory Andrews. There's going to be a few bonus episodes slip into the feed in the next week or so before we get right back into the hardcore ornithology and researchers. If you can't wait to get some of the bird nerds that haven't made it into the podcast feed yet, head over to thebirdemergency.com/live where you'll find recent live streams. And hey, why not get involved in the live streams?
Bird nerds, I'm Grant and I'm a bird nerd. This is the Bird Emergency because, by jingoes, it is an emergency. And that's where I get to talk to other bird nerds, people interested in conservation, researchers, ecologists, doers, activists. You get the gist. And today, it's Gregory Andrews. Now, Gregory is a Dharawal man, and he was appointed the very first of Australia's Threatened Species Commissioners. Now, remember that. We're going to get to that a bit down the track in the show. I've been waiting to talk to someone about Threatened Species Commissioner for a long time, and I've got one of them. That's so cool. Anyway, the reason that I got Gregory in and on is because he's managing some land for wildlife. It's called Wombat Ridge. He owns it. He's whacked a covenant on it, which means it's protected. It's out near Goulburn. But this guy's pretty amazing. He was just telling me about some of the travels he's done in recent years, so we might touch on that. But he's the Associate Adjunct Professor of Applied Ecology at the University of Canberra. Actually, I might have got the Applied Ecology wrong because it's the Institute of Applied Ecology, but we'll talk about that more. So, without any further waffle, Gregory Andrews, welcome to the Bird Emergency.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Oh, it's a pleasure. It's a pleasure.
Yeah.
Now, let's bring this in. This is what got me fired up to get hold of you. This is a tweet you brought out. Just saying, this weekend we installed 12 nest boxes for endangered glossy black and gang cockatoos. Thanks to the Biodiversity Conservation Trust New South Wales for funding support, and arborists, Dean and Lennox, and we're going to talk about Dean and Lennox in a minute, for their expert climb. Now, the good news is both of the species came and had a look, so that's great. Look, 13.6 thousand views, and the notifications have been popping off. Absolutely popping off. Oh, I don't want that one there, do I? I want that. Gregory, let's first have a brief rundown of your career. And actually, let's leave out, I finished uni and blah, blah. Let's talk about when you got involved in or interested in conservation and what led to getting appointed the Threatened Species Commission.
Yeah, that's a good question. And, because I trained as an economist, but as an Aboriginal person, I've always loved wildlife and been passionate about country and connecting with country. And, actually when I was at school, the only time I ever got detention was for putting up Greenpeace posters and refusing to take them down. So I've always had a really strong, deep passion for conservation. But yeah, you're right. I spent 2/3 of my career as a diplomat, and actually after the Threatened Species Commissioner, I finished up as Australia's ambassador to Ghana and 9 countries in West Africa. But wherever I was in my career, I always tried to integrate conservation. So in Africa, for example, I used Australia's aid program to support the rangers at Mole National Park, Ghana's biggest national park with one of the last strongholds of elephants which savanna elephants, which are now endangered. So I used Australian aid to help them and supply them with camera equipment from Outdoor Cameras Australia to do more monitoring of the species, but also to keep an eye on the poaching, keep the poaching at bay. But I was really lucky to be appointed as Australia's first Threatened Species Commissioner, and it felt pretty special, actually, to be an Aboriginal person in that job, because as Aboriginal people, caring for country is part of our identity, part of our DNA. And so when I got that job, I can say with my hand on my heart, it was the best job I ever had. I put my heart and soul into it, and probably, you know, I know that there's like more bats in Australia now, and that the Norfolk Island green parrot is a lot safer, and its numbers are a lot higher thanks to work that my team did. So, yeah, that was a fantastic job, and definitely the favourite job I had in my career.
I'm sometimes really cynical, and I'm too mean about the threatened species hub. I never want to downplay any of the amazing work being with it. But I think I'll leave the comments to that about that until after we've covered Wombat Ridge and lyrebird dreaming.
Yeah, but actually, just before, I think that's a good idea. But what I would say is, although I was a diplomat for most of my career, I think that's what the Threatened Species Commissioner position needed. And over time it'll change, but as Australia's first Threatened Species Commissioner, I remember when I finished up and I said to the Threatened Species Scientific Committee, 12 people who are kind of the absolute expert in their field, whether it's dugong, sorry, that's my dog, Fred. Hey, that's Fred, my dog, Fred. I remember saying to them, look, sorry for butchering the science. And they said, no, we thank you because you helped interpret for us with the rest of Australia. And so I think that the main contribution that I made as the commissioner and the asset that I had as having been mostly a diplomat, but also an Aboriginal person focused on communication. And my dreaming is the lyrebird, which speaks the language of all the animals, as you know, was exactly that, to be a bridge between science and reality. Because if we want to save species, it has to be more than just pure science. We need everyone on board, and we've got to compete with Kim Kardashian for attention, and Bali and plasma screen TVs, and so that was what I tried to do when I was the commissioner: remind Australians that our identity is embedded and etched deeply with our wildlife. You know, our sporting teams are named after them. We've got them on our money, on our coat of arms. Our de facto national flag is the boxing kangaroo. And so if we lose our biodiversity, we're losing what it means to be Australian.
Well, I'm going to come back to the commissioner, because I have some thoughts, and I'm sure people who are here with us now will have some thoughts as well.
Yeah.
But first, let's talk about your project at Wombat Ridge.
Yeah.
Give us the origin story.
All right. Yeah. Well, look, actually, it comes back to the Threatened Species Commissioner again, because when I was the commissioner, I kept meeting people who were covenanting. I kept meeting people who were buying land and putting conservation covenants on it, and I realised before that I had this mindset that wildlife protection was something that belonged in national parks. But national parks are only a small area and a small share of Australia, and our animals and plants aren't aware of where national park boundaries are. But also often national parks are really constrained with funding, and the funding that they do get is prioritised for what they call visitor experience, barbecues, campgrounds, roads, and the rangers actually have to spend a lot of time looking after people in national parks rather than looking after the animals and plants. So I realised that conservation covenanting had huge potential, and so when I finished up as a commissioner, I had this privilege for 3 or 4 years of learning from and having access to some of the best and most passionate conservationists, whether they were scientists or naturalists or, national park rangers or individual private people covenanting land to protect cassowaries or eastern quolls or 40 spotted pardalotes. And I realised that was something I wanted to do. And I felt that I was a really lucky person. My wife and I had paid off our mortgage. We're not into consumption and mindless consumption, which we're actually against that because it's causing major problems for the world. We're way outliving our global footprint. And so we decided to buy some land and put a conservation covenant on it. So, we bought Wombat Ridge, which is 50 hectares, about 120 acres, and it's about an hour and a half's drive from Canberra, here where I live. And we've just got a sort of a 7-point management plan, you could call it, for Wombat Ridge. You can see those photos there. We basically do feral animal control, all of the usual suspects there: goats, deer, feral pigs, foxes, feral cats are our main targets. And then we control weeds. Actually, it's less sexy than the cockatoos, but last week we had someone out there every day, a weed contractor, spraying, targeted selective spraying of any weeds that he could find. Then the other thing that we do that I'm really passionate about, and I love doing it, and I love engaging non-Indigenous people because we need more people to do this, is cultural burning. So in winter we have a cultural burning program, and then we also do regeneration, both natural and assisted, using dead wood, tree planting. Then we've got sort of threatened species reintroduction plan where we're reintroducing endangered plants like some of the beautiful little endangered daisies, the paper daisies. We also have a tree thinning program, which I'm really interested in, which is actually about making sure that the ratios of different trees are ideal for the more complicated structure with the understory. And so where some of the trees are a bit overabundant, carefully and according to good science, removing some of them to get the ratios right. And then the final thing that we did that created the attention last week is our habitat supplementation strategy. And I was lucky enough to get a grant from the Biodiversity Conservation Trust, which is the mob in New South Wales that you sign these conservation agreements with. And they provided us with some funding to have 12 purpose-designed nest boxes built and then installed. And we had an arborist to climb right up high in the trees to install those. And those are for glossy blacks and gangangs. And we see the gangang cockatoos quite a lot out there. But something really special for me was that the 2 days that we were installing them, the glossy came in on both of those days. And we know they're there because we see the evidence of them eating the casuarina seeds. But before the weekend that we installed them, a week and a half ago, I'd only seen them 3 times in 4 or 5 years. So I knew they were there, but I don't see them very often. But for me, I think personally, the fact that they were there the day we arrived to install them, and they sat and watched us on the second day when the arborist Lennox and Dean were climbing up those trees, is pretty special.
Now, that's Lennox and Dean, isn't it?
Yeah, that's Dean on the left and Lennox, his son, on the right. They're Maori fellas, and I just found them through, Google Maps, where you type in, arborists in Goulburn, and they came up. Climate Tree Services, I think what they call their business. But they were really, really happy to do it. Immediately said yes, didn't even really care how much they got paid. And I said to them, I said I felt that it was really special and symbolic that an Aboriginal fella who'd bought land and wanted to install these cockatoo boxes was getting help from two Maori to put them up in his trees, and they really like that too. And I like the fact that they're a father and son team. They're quite cheeky with each other. Lennox is a bit like a sugar glider, just flies up the tree so quickly you wouldn't believe.
I think, where's the shot of him up the tree?
Yeah, there he is, up the top of one of the trees. And we've had koalas in those trees as well. We've caught koalas on our camera traps climbing down from those trees and going across to other trees. But I think the reason we installed those boxes is we knew that it was good habitat. And with the glossy blacks, the bird nerds will all know, glossy blacks compared to, say, yellow-tailed black cockatoos are endangered because they're fussy and, like all birds, have to deal with major habitat depletion and disruption and climate change. But the yellow-tailed black cockatoos, we get them here in Canberra because there's pine tree just behind my house here. So the yellow-tails are better at adapting. They'll eat pine nuts but the glossy blacks really only eat casuarina seeds, and then they eat a few banksias that will only open when there's the right amount of fire. And then that block, Wombat Ridge, although it hasn't been farmed, nearly all of it is uncleared. But 100 years ago, it was selectively logged by the surrounding farmers and colonisers to get the wood to build their fences and houses. So there's a you could call it not an absence, but there's not a lot of good nest hollows for birds or things that need big old 300-year-old trees, because there's the oldest trees there close to 300 years, but there's a bit of a shortage of them. So the idea with the nest boxes is to replicate that and get those really good hollows going. And so, yeah, we'll be monitoring those, and I hope I can come back and tell you the story and share the photos and video footage when we have baby glossy blacks in those nest boxes.
I hope we can do an ongoing sort of tracking of the story of one.
Yeah. The interesting thing, I was just going to say, the interesting thing about how it all fits together is with the cultural burning. And I think I was telling you just before when we were having a chat about what we could talk about on this show, but when I do the cultural burning, the glossy black, not the glossy blacks, the gangs come in. And then I was wondering about, because I thought they're not carnivores, so why would they be coming in? Because they're not looking for lizards or anything or that's escaping. But actually, I'm pretty sure that they would have, I know they evolved in cultural burning for tens of thousands of years in southeastern Australia, and they would have learnt through evolution that where Aboriginal mob do these cool winter burns with the white, soft, billowing smoke, that's actually going to be a safer place for them to find nests to avoid canopy, like bushfires going up into the canopy in summer. So I'm pretty sure that's what's going on.
And
I think there's a crimson rosella that's just come.
There is. I was just going to say that'll be a good lead into our. That'll be a good lead into our habitat.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. There's one on the tree there, actually. They just.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Just I want to make a comment about those gangs and your burning, which I know we've spoken about before. But first, can you tell us what your arborist friend told you about another time they were hanging nest boxes?
Oh, I don't want to get them into trouble, but however, basically, it relates to the integrity of biodiversity offsets. And they were, let's just say, as everyone knows, I was a threatened species commissioner, so I learnt by osmosis, but I don't have a degree in ecology. I've got a degree in international relations and a degree in economics. And I've got my associate adjunct professor position at the Institute of Ecology because of the relationship between policy and ecology. So that they rely on me for, not because I'm an expert ecologist. But I think, like stories that I've heard so many times, these guys were just really grateful that I knew that the boxes had to be a certain height and that they should face east and don't put them too close together, and otherwise the birds will think, oh no, there's two nest holes too close together there, it won't be very good for us, we'll have competition. There are so many stories about people implementing, because the other work they do is for either trimming trees under electricity wires or occasionally installing nest boxes for biodiversity offset programs. And let's just say there was no expert advice at all on how to install them. So they knew how to climb up the tree, but they had no one to tell them from the company that was actually investing in offsets how the boxes should be installed, what height, how to manage predators. And so the integrity of those offsets was really dubious.
Yeah, which is one of the ongoing issues. And of course, when I spoke with Mick Callan once, and we were talking about the need for artificial hollows.
Yeah.
I mean, the scale of the deficit, the number of hollows that were in deficit is in the billions in this country.
Yeah, it is. And because all the old paddock trees are dying, some of them because they're that age, others from climate change and drought, but there's been no regeneration of those paddock trees. So we're facing this cliff. We're hitting a cliff, which is actually how I first learned about these cockatubes. Those boxes that you were showing, they're the ones for the gangs. But the ones in the glossy blacks are actually a metre high, and they have an open hole on the top. And in WA, they've spent a lot of time working out the science behind it, and the cockies there love it. But one of the reasons is there's just no paddock trees anymore. They're all reaching the end of their lives and dying. And this is a cliff that we're facing that has a sort of 200-year origin. So we can't rely on paddock trees. We've got to help the species adapt.
And as we come into the urban fringes, we've now got the situation where any tree that is in the process of forming hollows is now rated as dangerous.
That's right.
So
I know we're going to talk about. There's the crimson rosellas at my thing. Thought I'd just show you that before, just in case they're not there later on when we're talking about garden birds and gardens. But yeah, actually, the other thing that I noticed when I was the commissioner that made me happy when I went to Kangaroo Island was the beautiful vegetation along the sides of the roads. But around here where I live, around Goulburn, it infuriates me because the council chops it all down. And it's some of the last vestiges of more complicated, what they call, the sort of like biodiverse habitat structure. But the councils think it's dangerous for cars, and so that all gets chopped down. And I'm trying to be a grumpy old man. No,
that's my job, mate. Okay. One of the other issues as well is that we have permits issued in other parts of the country where people can take timber from roadsides for firewood collection. And, of course, there's no monitoring of that, so people are felling trees that show any sign of rot as well. And, of course, that's habitat for bats, for lizards, for all sorts of invertebrates, and gliders.
This is the problem. And actually that example in the Northern Territory at the moment of all of that land clearing that's going on, allegedly illegal land clearing for cotton farming, that we often, unfortunately, regulation has become a dirty word, and it's green tape. But if you have a fantastic, a beautiful offset scheme, but no one's holding the people who are investing in the offsets accountable, then it can be. If you're lucky, it'll work. If you're unlucky, it'll be a complete waste of time. Which was so many stories I've heard about nest box being installed, and because they're too low, so they just fill up with snails and not a single target species benefits. And so we have all these regulations, but implementing regulation is seen as, I think, because regulation's a dirty word and tax is a dirty word. I'm proud to pay my taxes, because my taxes are actually I'm proud to be Australian, and I love the things we have in Australia, and I'm proud to pay tax. But because taxation, the politics of taxation is about cutting tax, there's no money for regulators to actually audit or control or investigate. And then regulation is also a dirty word. It's seen as green tape that hinders business development. But so many of the problems we face, if we just had good regulation and enforced it, we wouldn't even need to spend that money to fix the problem. We just need to implement the good, strong laws.
I can't resist, Gregory. I have to throw in a bit of snark and a bit of smart-ass comment here.
Yeah.
If you're hearing this or watching this and you're one of those people that complains about taxes and complains about rates, don't you dare ever complain about the elective surgery waiting list or pothole. Piss off. Okay? There you go.
I hate corruption, and the corruption under the last government infuriated me.
And
I'm so glad that
were rewarded.
Exactly. I'm so glad
that were awarded billions of dollars to people who couldn't manage. They couldn't manage to get to lose their virginity in a house of ill repute. And in every portfolio, and then you've got people squawking about, a 0.5% rise in their rates at the same time they want to whinge about their rubbish collection being reduced. The reason that all the services are being reduced is because the money has been just funneled into rubbish. So anyway, let's do a whole other show about that, because I want to actually I'll let people know
the benefits of an ICAC for Australia's biodiversity. But once an ICAC is fully operational and effective, hopefully people will be more confident about paying tax. But we need to shift this narrative that tax cuts are good and tax increases. Because, tax is actually investing in all the things that make our country great. I'm proud to pay my tax. Yeah.
I'd just like to see some
I would like to see a lot more of my tax paid on conservation. And I'm quite proud of the ACT government, because they spend ACT tax money on species that don't even, on species programs that have no immediate benefit for the ACT. So they run I know we're supposed to be talking about birds, but sorry, this is wallabies.
No, we're talking about everything.
I'm addicted to marsupials, but I do love birds, and I am a bird nerd. But they have a program out at Tidbinbilla where they have a brush-tailed rock wallaby breeding program, and they use yellow-tailed rock wallabies as surrogate mums to carry brush-tailed joeys, and every joey goes to Korea. So I'm proud of that. I want my ACT taxes to pay for that because I don't care about state boundaries. I care about wallabies, and I'm so proud of the ACT government for spending ACT taxpayers' money on something that Victoria supposedly benefits from.
And is that the rock wallabies in East Gippsland or the ones in the Grampians?
I think they're in both. They're called brush-tailed rock wallabies, and they're definitely in the Snowy Mountains country.
Yeah,
but I'm pretty sure
I think it's the East Gippsland population.
I thought it was the same species, but I could be wrong. But when I was the commissioner, there were a couple of times when I got a crush on a particular animal, and the biggest crush I got was on this rock wallaby called Lily. And she's just the most beautiful yellow-tailed brush rock wallaby, and she'll come and sit on your lap. And she works full-time as a surrogate mum for brush-tailed rock wallabies. And all of that is quite an expensive program, but that's what we need more of. We need governments to be proud to invest money in saving these animals and plants that define who we are as a nation.
We'll have another discussion another time about some of the really great projects that have been under the stewardship of the Threatened Species Commissioner and the hub, the recovery hub. Mm-hmm. I'll just let people know too. I just got confirmation earlier today.
Yeah.
Next Monday's slot here is with Martin Ty, and we're going to be talking about degrowth. So I've got some questions about how do we make degrowth something that the mainstream will swallow, especially the way that our economy is structured. So if you're interested in the sort of economics and the adjunct to conservation, come back next week as well.
Yeah.
Okay, let's jump into habitat gardening, since you gave us a tease into your backyard. I first want to ask, what is right behind you? Because I can't see well enough. What's the purple flowers there?
Oh, they're actually there's a crimson rosella eating on my bird feeder.
On the bird feeder.
Actually, underneath the bird feeder, that's all.
Are they a heritage hydrangea behind?
Yeah, rare hydrangeas. And this is my favourite hydrangea. I'll just pick one off to show everyone. Look at that.
Yeah, we used to have that growing. I studied at Burnley. We had some of those. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm glad I picked that out with my dodgy eyesight.
No, it's really good. Actually, I'll do a panorama if you want. This is my front yard, and mostly actually non-Indigenous. But then actually over the back, I've got a crabapple grove, and I've got a native plants understory. And so all of the understory is locally endemic wattles, haykears, bottle brushes, endangered daisies, native grasses, and a few non-locally endemic salt bushes. But our garden, when we bought this place, we've been here for 16 years, was just a lawn. Probably if I'd had my own way, everything would have been native. But we also wanted a lot of deciduous trees to let the winter warmth come into the house.
And in Canberra, you have to do that.
Yeah.
When we were having our conversation to sort of set up what we would talk about, I was really impressed with one of your strategies that you told me, and that was that even though you have so many things that are not native plants and not Indigenous, but that you have some sort of plan to replace them. And you can't rip something out that birds and animals are using
Yeah,
Or
exactly.
you have something that is able to be used by the wildlife
Yeah,
at the time that you take it out.
exactly. And actually, that principle, even if you're getting rid of blackberries or something out in
Yeah,
nature,
lantana,
got to follow the
everything.
same principle. Yeah, and so here, like actually in these hydrangeas, there's a family of superb blue wrens that just love it in there, and also because if we've got little bits of parmesan cheese or like food scraps on our plates after dinner, we throw that into the bushes, and they come every day looking for all of it, and so do the white-browed scrub
I was
wrens.
going to say the scrub
Yeah.
wrens would have been in on
Yeah.
that straight away.
And they love it. They don't really care that it's non-native, because we're actually very close. We're less than 100 metres from native bushland, and so we've actually got Canberra has these wonderful bush corridors that come nearly everywhere, and so what we do with our garden is we try to provide habitat complexity. Like actually, I've trained Fred to chase the cats, the roaming cats. He wouldn't attack them, but he barks at them and chases them out of the garden. And I've also I've had cat traps out there. So we control aggressive. What we do in our garden is we try to provide habitat structure. We choose not to own a cat, and we discourage cats from coming into our garden and encourage local owners to keep cats indoors. And then we provide supplementary feeding. I always clean the feeders and the bird baths, and then we also control dominant species. So like I don't feed currawongs. And actually, I shoo the currawongs off, but I hand feed a family of magpies. They come inside sometimes, and they'll sit on my lap just here where I'm sitting. And they come in the morning, they see me making the coffee, and they call, and I give them dog food because that's kind of balanced and healthy. Yeah. I would never give them mince or bread. And then all the granivorous parrots, I give them like good quality mixed bird seed and clean their feeders regularly. And I think that the reality is that Australia is no longer a utopian wilderness, and birds in backyards, they're wild birds, but they're not in a wilderness, and they've adapted to this. I'll just show you how I've trained Fred to bark at the cats. Fred, where's the cat? Where's the cat? It's on. Run one. You don't have. Can you hear him?
I can. That's great.
I'm just. Where's that? No one alone.
My morning walking companion Shadow also is manic about cats and rats, and we have rats that run along the fence here, and he just goes troppo.
Oh yeah. Actually, the other thing we have in our garden is we have nest boxes, which I put up for the crimson and the eastern rosellas, but I'm pretty sure that they've all been taken over by possums.
Yeah.
Possums have actually bitten them out. But I love the possums. At night time, I hand feed the possums as well. I go out and give them, like I have another feeder like a bird feeder that I put, our compost I separated into food and straight to the compost because the possums are opening the lid on our compost and going through it anyway. So I pick out the nice like things and if I give them a piece of pear or banana, they'll take that out of my hand and I love that.
What do they like best?
The possums
fruit?
Really, they like fruit, yeah, and they probably shouldn't have too much because it's probably a bit high on the glycemic index for them.
Yeah.
They love banana and they love apple cores. I save all my apple cores and any greens, like if there's some lettuce or something that's a bit, how's your father, then I'll put that in the tray. Yeah.
And do you put that on a different tray, like it's separated from where any of the birds feed?
Yeah, it's a separate tray, and the birds could land on it if they want, but they don't really seem to be that interested in it. We do get bowerbirds in our garden, and I wouldn't be surprised if they got into it. But I usually just put that out after dinner, and then it's gone in the morning. So it's sort of the nighttime and the daytime, but a different feeder.
Well, let's talk about some of the highlights in your garden.
Yeah.
Can you tell us what the most popular plants are in your garden that wildlife seem to use? And that could be any wildlife. And then tell us some of the highlights of the animals that are using your garden.
The species, yeah. Look, I think we've planted about 20 trees. And I think if I had to say what do they like the most, it's the trees. Because the trees provide shade. The crabapple trees have crabapples that all the different parrots and cockies get into. So they provide some food, and a lot of the shrubs underneath provide that complexity for smaller birds. But you've just put up the absolute highlight for me. So we have a pair of gang cockatoos that come about once a week or once a fortnight. And they usually just come and sit in one of the trees and start going and call out to me. And if there are other birds in the bird feeder, they know, and then I just walk out and stand next to the bird feeder, and then the other birds are too scared, and then the gangs come down, and they'll fly down and they'll brush, their wings will brush past my head, and if I hand food to them, they'll look at it, but they prefer not to eat out of my hand.
Yeah.
So those, just because I just love them. But the other bird that I really love that visits every day, is the king parrot. And that's particular. I call her Mama. That's the mother king parrot. She comes with her fella. And they wait. And they know that they're too shy. They let the rosellas and everything else bully them. So they just sit in the trees and then they just start going, beep, beep, beep. And then I just come out and sit down where I am now with some seeds in my hand, and they just land on my hand. And she particularly just sits on my lap and sits on my hand. And I love her. I really love her. I've got a bond with her. And the really interesting thing about her, and this is where I think some people might think, oh, it's the indulgent feeding birds. It's a one-way relationship. It's not. She remembered. We went to Africa. Yeah, we were out of this house for 2 years when I was in Africa, and when we came back, within 2 weeks, she was back, and she was just sitting here going, and just came and landed straight on me. She just knows me, and she knows my son, and she trusts us, and so they integrate us into their lives and their food sources. And for me, I think
you're like the 7-Eleven down the end of the street.
I am. It's like I have to be really strict on myself not to let them have too many sunflower seeds, But I'm not a purist. It's like later on after this, I've got to go and pick my daughter up. She works at Macca's, and I say to her, look, try not to have Macca's every time you work there, because it's not healthy, but it's sometimes food. And so, look, it's the same with sunflowers. We don't have to be absolutist about it. So occasionally I give them sunflowers, but they do know that if they come here, particularly I love the way both she and this pair of gangs have worked out that they'll come to my place when they want something and I'm home, and they'll know that I'll come out.
Yeah.
And that their way of getting the food is to trust me when the other birds don't. I love that. Yeah.
Well, they're very intelligent. Now, it's a good opportunity to point out the figures that Daryl Jones told me in an earlier show. Was it between 20 and 35% of households in Australia, and that's replicated over most of the Western world,
Yes, it is.
are feeding birds. So
Yeah.
So I think that if anyone was to say don't feed birds, and I used to be in that camp, that war has been lost. That battle is over. So what we want to do now is make sure that people who are feeding are feeding in a way that is not detrimental to them.
Yeah, right way feeding, which addresses nutrition, sanitation, avoids or minimises the impacts of predators and dominant birds.
Yep.
Which is why I started feeding the magpies, because I realised the currawongs were getting it, and I didn't want the currawongs. So then I started hand feeding them, and the currawongs won't take it out of my hand. So they're pretty much I did used to have, when my son was younger, I had one of those water squirters, and I used to
the big guns.
Yeah. So, but I think you're right. But I think it's important to qualify, I think, two things. And one is or three things. One, Aboriginal people, we've been feeding animals for tens of thousands of years here. Yeah. And so I think that's the first thing. It's about caring for the environment and being a part of it. We're all part of it together. We're not better than the rest of it. And I think it's a bit arrogant to think that we're somehow separate or better and we know what's best. So I think that's the first point. The second point you already mentioned, everywhere else in the world, including BirdLife UK and BirdLife Africa and all the other peak bird associations, they provide advice on how to feed birds, and they sell bird feeders. And so they educate people on how to feed birds the right way. And I think that's really, really important. And now I've forgotten my third point. Sorry. But I might remember
we can hold that over for next time. Now everybody, just so you're aware, I do want to get some questions in at the end. And Gregory does have to go pretty soon. So, for the Threatened Species Commissioner thing, I know Gregory's happy to come back at another time that we can work out. So we'll do a whole session on that. But I do want to raise a couple of points just to get some comment about the whole thing about calling something a commissioner. So and I'll do a little preamble so it's easy for me to clip it out. My main problem with the title, the Threatened Species Commissioner, is that it, in a way, it builds it up to make it sound as important and influential as, say, the Productivity Commission. Or,
Human Rights Commissioner, or the Police Commissioner.
Or even the Child Safety Commissioner, which is the one getting all the airtime at the moment.
Yeah.
But you can... I'd like you to tell me what you told me about where the Threatened Species Commissioner sits, because if people don't understand where it sits in the hierarchy and the role, then people are going to think like I did when it was first touted.
Yeah.
It gets all the publicity. That would be important, and there'd be Senate estimates hearings about what the Threatened Species Commissioner said and what the Commission said, like there is for every time the Productivity Commission releases a report.
Yeah.
So can you paint that picture, and we'll perhaps that'll be a starting off point for the discussion.
Yeah. And so, look, actually, the Threatened Species Commissioner does appear before Senate estimates. So I used to do that. I really enjoyed it because I got to tell stories about real Australians who were saving endangered species. But the Threatened Species Commissioner is a public servant and is like senior executive in the Environment Department. That's where I was. But reporting through a few layers to the minister officially. And, I was really lucky, I think, particularly with Greg Hunt, to have a really good relationship with him where I could communicate directly with him. But look, I think that, and people used to get confused. I remember people would say, oh, they'd introduce me to their children. You need to meet Gregory. He's the minister for threatened species. And then I remember one ambassador actually said, oh, Gregory, you're the best dressed member of the Australian cabinet. And I was like, I'm not a cabinet minister. I'm not even a minister. I'm a public servant. But I do think that there are pros and cons either way, and there's no right or wrong. So the Threatened Species Commission, when I was a commissioner, was embedded in the Environment Department, and that's where I believe it still is. The advantage is if you have the right capabilities and particularly if there's money around in government, being in the department, you have more influence to get money. So if I'd been an independent commissioner, I could have criticised the government's policies, but I wouldn't have been able to mobilise hundreds of millions of dollars for threatened species conservation. So the advantage was being in the department to mobilise funding, but the disadvantage was that I was a public servant, and so I couldn't criticise government policy. And personally, I think, like, I'm on the record, I've written a few op-eds, and before the election, I was sort of like, I think the Guardian and Al Jazeera and a few other news interviewed me about it. And I said, look, I think the Threatened Species Commissioner needs to be independent, because in the department you can mobilise a lot of money, but the two biggest, like, our threats, we've got our invasive species, and actually mobilising money for that was something I could do quite effectively, but I couldn't criticise, for example, biodiversity offset policies, or I couldn't criticise the government's climate change policies, because as a public servant, I wasn't allowed to comment on government policy, let alone criticise it. It's actually against the law. There's an act called the Australian Public Service Act. Public servants can't even say on Facebook, criticise government policy on Facebook. It's a breach of the code of conduct. Yeah. It'd be nice if the politicians applied a code of conduct to themselves, but that's another issue. And I have a lot of respect for Mark Dreyfus. I think he's doing a great job in sort of bringing in more accountability. Yeah. But so that the disadvantage of the Threatened Species Commissioner model is if you don't have a passionate minister and government supportive of conservation, then it risks becoming a greenwashing exercise. However, I do think that I'm really pleased and excited to see we've got a minister in Tanya Plibersek who genuinely cares about the environment. You can see she wears that on her heart and is putting energy into the job and being honest about the problems, like that report that was covered up for years, if not months, on the state of Australia's environment, months, if not years, and then she released it very quickly. And so I think she deserves a fair go and praise for what she's doing, and including establishing Environment Protection Agency. So if you had the commissioner, if the head of the Environment Protection Agency was a commissioner, see, they wouldn't necessarily be able to mobilise money. And the way the public service works is the public servants often get cross with those independent commissioners because they say what needs to be said. And so then it's harder for them to actually secure funding from within the government. So yeah, it's
what they never do, Gregory, though, and this is my frustration with it, is that the PR around the position and around the commission is really good. Right? I don't have a problem with that. But as you've said, there's three levels of the public service before you can get to the minister, which means anything can be, yes, ministered.
Yes.
Yes, we'll hold a review or blah 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 blah.
Yeah.
I wish that, and this will be the same for the the environment protection and if they have a biodiversity commissioner or something as well. There should be some legislation that means the minister must take account in decisions.
Yeah.
From reports and recommendations from the commissioner. Then it means something. Then like in immigration, the immigration minister can do what he or she wants.
Yeah.
But the process must take into account advice.
Yeah.
Whereas that's missing in conservation, and that's why it's weak. That's my opinion.
I actually look. I think overall I agree with you, and I'm proud of everything that I achieved as the Threatened Species Commissioner. But I was also lucky to have a fantastic team, and the secretary of the department at the time, Gordon de Brouwer, really trusted me and allowed me to communicate directly with the minister, and the minister trusted me. So I don't know how it works now because I purposely think it's not proper for me to interfere or comment.
No,
and I have respect. Yeah, I've got to step back, and I have respect for the people who have done the job and are doing the job now. But structurally, like if you had to choose between being able to mobilise more money from the government or monitor and implement and strengthen biodiversity conservation laws to stop habitat degradation and to ensure that like offset schemes, etc., have integrity, you'd have to choose the latter. And so what's missing in Australia is strong laws that are implemented and where companies and people who degrade the environment are held to account. And the fact that thousands of hectares in the Northern Territory has been completely razed to the ground, and it's only really become an issue because it was a news story. Otherwise, it would have, for cotton is an example. So that was apparently, like according to the media, just a flagrant disregard for the law, and it's ignored.
But Gregory, I need to pull up on that one a little bit because, of course, that's, and I'm not saying that if it was illegal clearing, it's okay.
Yeah.
But what we ignore every day is it's legal in Queensland today.
Oh.
2 bulldozers and a chain.
Yeah. I know.
And take down countless hectares of important habitat. And I believe Tanya Plibersek deserves a go. But we're nearly a year into this government.
Yeah.
Which means that it's a year until we start going into election campaign mode in this country. I want to see her do something. I want to see forests cut down. I want to see her have a go at the Queensland government. I want to see her have a go at what's going on in Western Australia.
There's a biodiversity crisis, like there is a climate crisis, and like I've said again in op-eds and when interviewed by The Guardian or whatever, Australia actually needs to stop all habitat degradation. We've got enough land, and we've degraded. When I drive to Wombat Ridge, it's an hour and a half's drive. I drive through lots of empty, degraded country. We don't need to degrade any more country. We can invest in the country that's being degraded. Every hectare of remaining habitat needs protection. Yeah, this just infuriated me. Where they've raised this development just outside of Queanbeyan, that not only they've taken, there's not even a blade of grass left, let alone a tree. And they have the hide to call it Jumping Creek, and they talk about it how it's a sanctuary by a burbling river. So we need to stop all habitat degradation. We're a wealthy country. We can afford to. We've got enough land to dedicate the remaining land to nature, which is actually providing a huge service to us as humans. And at the same time, with climate change, we equally need to stop mining coal and LNG and oil. We need to stop mining and exporting fossil fuels and move ASAP to renewables.
So there's
Yeah,
that's a good point to sort of wind up the podcast episode. I'll just say, Gregory, there's a couple of people in this country who have the power to do things at the stroke of a pen, and they're called ministers. And Tanya Plibersek is one of those. And it might be difficult within the Labor Party.
Yeah.
You know, they can't do anything without the Greens.
I'd love to see a Dirt showing more ambitious on stopping all new fossil fuel projects and stopping all habitat degradation and also putting an end to these ridiculous forest agreements that let the governments like the Victorian government and Tasmanian government and New South Wales government rampage and destroy beautiful Australian forests.
And the new form of greenwashing, which is conflating climate change with action on biodiversity, and we need to pull those two things out. By doing something which is climate positive, it doesn't make it something we should tick off if it fails the biodiversity test.
They need to meet both. Climate action is good for biodiversity, but it has to be subject to this rigorous development assessment so that the industrial process of climate action doesn't harm the environment. We need to get emissions down. And actually, the main way we need to do that is actually stop coal mining and stop all of these LNG and fracking projects, which are also horrific for the environment. I flew over the Hunter Valley once. I've got some in a helicopter, and I took a video, and everyone thinks the Hunter Valley is just this beautiful place with all these vineyards. It's just all these horrific holes in the ground. With like rows of trees between the road and the coal mine, so you can't see it. But anyway,
and
I'd like to see that happen.
People, if you are interested in what I think is the latest greenwashing wave, have a look at the power company. What is it? Acciona? Is that what it's called in? I'm not sure if they're in Queensland, but they've got ads all over Twitter at the moment. And for their wind farms, that's going to be the next battleground. But Gregory, we'll finish up the podcast episode now. Yep. I know you've told me that you're happy to come back, so we'll tease out so many of these issues again. But podcast listeners, remember, thebirdemergency.com/live is where you can find what's coming up live. And I'd ask you to check out the hashtag first seen and heard, which is where I take notice of the first birds that I see and hear each day. And if you want to know where Gregory's info on Wombat Ridge is, you can follow Wombat Ridge on Twitter. The website, lyrebirddreaming.com, is where you can get more detail on everything we started talking about with Wombat Ridge. So,
right,
Gregory Andrews, thanks a bunch for
having me. Yeah,
the bird emergency.
I feel like we probably needed to talk more about birds, but we were talking about the next thing up from birds, which is their habitat that they need, and that we have a responsibility to look after and care for.
Definitely.
Yeah. Thanks for having me on the show.
Well, bird nerds, you've made it this far. I guess that means you're pretty into the show. That's a very good thing, and I appreciate it. But I really, really would appreciate it if you visited thebirdemergency.com/coffee, because, you know, with all the inflation and stuff, coffee's getting expensive. See you, bird nerds.